Oh, well, good afternoon. Happy Sunday. Happy election. Happy heart. I'm Kendra KOPELKE, co-editor of Passenger, and I'm speaking to you from Baltimore, Maryland. On behalf of everyone at Passenger, thank you all so much for joining us for what promises to be a wonderful celebration of poetry. Congratulations to all of our 2020 contest winners. It's especially lovely and lucky to be part of this joyful weekend in America. We didn't know when we scheduled this reading where we would be today. And now look, here we are. We have a president-elect who promises to bring us together, and a vice president-elect who is the first Black and South Asian woman to hold this office. And speaking of breaking new ground, Passenger has always existed to bring about change, to fight ageism and inspire older people to pursue their dream of writing and publishing, to believe it's not too late, but in fact, just the right time. The Passenger name is a word we made up, combining the word passenger with the word passage. We're all passengers on this road, always learning and growing, even if we can't leave our houses. When Mary Azrael and I began Passenger 30 years ago, our dream was to provide a space for writers 50 and older. I was in my early 30s, so 50 seemed light years away. Back then in 1990, the oldest people we heard from were in their 70s. Today, we regularly publish writers in their 80s and 90s, and even older. ESTEVE, one of today's poets, said this in the cover letter she sent with her poetry entry. Dear Passenger editors, it is with great pleasure that I submit poems to you again. Back in the 1990s, when I was still a twerp in my 70s, I was overjoyed to have a few pieces of my writing in a new magazine with a strange name of Passenger. It's been an honor and a thrill to read these letters and collect this body of work, make friends, and help writers find a larger audience. This month, for example, Passenger poet Sarah Yerkes, whose first book of poems we published last year when Sarah was 101, will be featured on a BBC program. We'll post the link on our website. The Passenger Poetry Contest has been around almost as long as Passenger. We created it in order to bring national attention to a poet over 50 at a time when all the writing prizes were directed towards poets 40 and under. The 2020 contest winner, Liz Abrams-Morley, is the 28th poet to receive this prize. This year, we read over 2,000 poems and selected 45 honorable mentions. Obviously, we couldn't invite everyone who won to read today, even virtually, so we selected poets to read that were not close to our home and as far away as Costa Rica and Ireland. We'd like to thank our hardworking and perceptive guest editors, Shirley Brewer, Hervey Evans, Sylvia Fishback-Braden, and Rebecca Remington. And also special thanks to Jared Schuster at the University of Baltimore for running this reading. When the poets are finished, we hope you'll stick around for questions and conversation with us. And now I have the honor of introducing our first poet, Penelope SCAMBLY SCHOTT.
I had to unmute myself. We're learning the technology here. Anyway, I'm Penelope SCAMBLY SCHOTT, and I live in Dufur, Oregon, population 637. And the name of my poem is Report from the Future. I'm the oldest woman in the world, or make that the oldest human. Men mostly died in the wars. Husbands, brothers, fathers, sons. My last living great-great-grandson died yesterday. a sweet boy. I had thought he was happy until he stabbed himself with a stone knife. The oldest sturgeon alive in the river is only 162. She asks about the long before. I recount the bloody years. She believes me. There are a few turtles as old as I am, and some trees. I chat with the trees. They make excellent company. Trees are savvy and also witty. Walking around is highly overrated, they say. Their great-grandparents once shaded the mammoths. Big, say the trees. Enormo. Mammoth. The trees and I find that joke hilarious. You need a sense of humor to live as long as we have. I survive by nibbling the moon. It grows back. Thank you. And it's my pleasure to introduce the next reader, Jean Nordhaus.
Hello, I am Jean Nordhaus. As Penelope said, I'm from Baltimore, although I live originally, but I've lived in Washington, D.C. for most of my life. And the poem I'm going to read is based on a childhood memory from the waning days of World War II, and it relates a verbal misunderstanding, which strikes me today as comical, but at the time it was deadly serious. How I Learned Violence. They sat around the living room for hours talking about Hitler, whispers and veiled looks drifting my way like the rivers of smoke from their cigarettes. Someone named Hitler was bad. I was learning what bad was, learning my thou shalt nots, run with scissors, shout, wander off in the grocery store, scribble crayons on the wall. I had a bath toy, a little sailor with a black mustache and an evil scowl. I called him Hitler because I hit him, scratched him, scraped the blue goo from his rubber midi with my fingernails. Stepped on, he collapsed and shrieked, but bounced right back with his evil frown and would not bow to my will, enormous and absolute. Meanwhile, the parleys in the living room wound on. The grown-ups with their banks of rules, their anxious eyes, the ash from their cigarettes. I'm happy to introduce our next reader, Beverly Greenspan.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Thank you. And I'm Beverly Greenspan. I live in West Hartford, Connecticut. And the poem I'm going to read came from something that I read about the death of the last native speaker of an Alaskan language, Eyak. I had learned that many languages of indigenous peoples all over the world have similarly become extinct. And when a language dies out, a unique way of perceiving the world is lost. In the case of Eyak, a French student decided to teach himself the language, but he remains its only fluent speaker. So, into a silence. The seals still jabber, and the orca whistles with its pod in the exuberant waters. But the words are forgotten that shape the sense of sinew and wind, of shell and snow, of drums and mystery among the speakers of Eyak, since Marie Smith Jones, who was the last whose native tongue it was, died in 2008, even those names, the common coinage of another language, But into that silence, among the sea otters and the salmon, the stones under ice, and the new inarticulate roar of engines, came a student from a French school who had taught himself from DVDs to be the only one to speak the lost language fluently. At 21, he traveled to Alaska, trying to teach those who were speaking to each other without those words, astonishing them with his passion for what was abandoned, astonishing the summer sun and winter darkness, the whales and the birds of the sea, as if a shell full of the absence of what lived in it echoed against his ear as he set sail, his tongue navigating the wash of sound through which they were once known. It's my pleasure now to present Betty Ajemian.
Hello, everybody. My name is Betty Ajemian, and I live in Boston. Many years ago, I lived a few years with my family in Greenwich, Connecticut, a very pristine, clean, upscale town. And in commuting to and from New York by train and car, the germ of the idea for my poem came to me, and it percolated for a long time before I finished it. So I'll read it to you now. It's called Graffiti. It has reckless, insouciant gaiety. It lies on undersides, backsides, waysides, out of the waysides. They must leap high to do it, foisting each other, furtive, lightning fast, swathing by flashlight, moonlight. Growing boys, gutty boys, brown boys, white boys, jeaned boys, rubber-soled boys, deprived boys, high boys. Who carries the color? Who buys? Who leads? They'll show us, make us see as we pass in fast cars, fast trains, fast limousines, bound for town, country, airport, home, upscale sights in sweet surrounds. Efflorescent, this downside art, like early man's, frescoes blooming in the dark. And I'd like to introduce to you Bill Quist, who will be the next poet. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bill Quist from Minneapolis, Minnesota. This poem sort of self-explains what spawned it. And then from there, I tried to, as William Staff, follow the thread. And the closing line was inspired by a Ted Kooser poem. Also, I once found a clipped out poem between the pages of my late grandmother's cookbook. This is called What I Would Like. When asked in group, what would you like to be remembered for? I thought, a great poet, but then thought, well, that's unrealistic and probably egocentric. So I said, just a good person. Then I realized that in a couple of generations, I won't be remembered for anything by anyone. In 100 years, no one will be alive who saw me hand $5 today from my car window to the homeless woman with the cardboard sign at the intersection. Even if I publish some good poems, they'll become dust soon enough, same as I. Christ, no one even reads Keats anymore, let alone the ancient Greeks. So if I have to answer, I'll say I hope somewhere, after I've been dead a good long while, someone will take a book from a shelf, maybe a cookbook, and a scrap of paper will slip out and flutter to the floor. It will be one of my poems that someone else once liked enough to clip and save. And this new person will pick it up and say, What the hell? I could write a poem as good as this. And then they will. Now I'm honored to introduce our next reader, Monica Valish.
Thank you, Bill, and hello, everyone. My name is Monica de Valish, and I'm joining you all the way from Dublin, Ireland. So it's nighttime here. Good night. My poem is called The Archaeologist Who Would Bequeath Her Body to Medical Science. And the archaeologist of the title is a dear friend from my school days, Helen. Helen surprised me a lot when she told me of her decision to gift her body to medical research, upon her death, of course, rather than observe the traditional burial rituals, which had been the focus of so much of her career. So my poem is attempting to reconcile that seeming incongruity and also to honor my friend by imagining an artifact that might be worthy of representing her amazing altruism. The archaeologist who would bequeath her body to medical science. So, my friend, you would deny the earth your bones. After all you've been through together, the years you spent kneeling in the mud, cajoling it to yield any old flint or shards, coins or combs, clay pipes, gently waking the dead like a child creeping to her parents' room for hearing, no, it's just a dream. There is to be no burial chamber befitting you, no ancient ritual to explain your death, your life of entering the cairn backwards, knocking on doors of wattle and daub, sifting for hard evidence, finally drawing the truth you found. Your curious maps to guide the children home from what they will endure. My memory finds us on our first night bewildered in the boarding school dorm, loading our lockers with rations and treasures from home, our little burial. Your jam jar displaying your appendix operation stitches drew my instant recognition. You understood. The artifact is inseparable from the meaning of the act. The making, using, exchanging, the offering, the gifting. That energy is never spent while you hold some relic in your hand. Now I wonder what the surgeon's trowel will find, what it might look like, preserved there in a specimen jar in the museum, inscribed, sacrifice, found in a woman, 21st century, rare. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to hand you over to our next passenger poet, Jean Esteve.
I'm Jean Esteve, and I live in Walport, Oregon. And my poem is called Darning Egg. Betty, when you tell me we're a mere upshot of maybes, blinking on and off, it makes me feel like an old sieve rusting in the thrift shop, world passing through, lingering long enough only to assure my obsolescence. I can't live so full of holes. How about domestic skill? I've revived the art of darning. Bought a wooden egg. Betty, watch me wheel this wide-eyed needle and thread. And now I'd like to introduce Wells Burgess.
It's so great to be with you all. My name is Wells Burgess. I live in Arlington, Virginia. The poem I'm going to read to you is called Not Available in Stores. It's a sonnet. I wrote it when I was young, back in my 70s, in school, in a one-on-one study with the poet Joseph Harrison. And he had written a sonnet that I'd seen that had all the same end rhymes. And I thought, well, I can do that. So I went ahead and did it. As for the poem, poems speak for themselves, and I generally don't like to comment on them before reading. But my sonnet has a French phrase in the sestet, la promesse de bonheur, the promise of happiness. This is the childhood promise given to us by fathers, by mothers, or sometimes others. I have never let go of that promise. And folks, I have to say at age 82, it's both blessing and curse. And here is my poem. Not available in stores. Just $19.95. Does your husband snore? Try this, and if you purchase it before the hour, the shipping's free. Cleaning a chore? This mop will soap and rinse and wax your floor like magic in a single stroke. Your core too flabby? Want to up your sit-up score? This machine will turn those squishy s'mores to washboard iron. But wait, there's more. We have a key that will unlock the door to ancient yearnings. La promesse de bonheur, a second run of the life you've lived, an encore, purged of loss, regret, the old rancor winnowed away. You must act now. The hour is late, not available in stores. And now I have the privilege of introducing the next poet who will read to you from her work, Diana Anwalt.
Yes.
Okay. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'd like to thank all of you for making this possible. When I was 8 years old, my parents moved our family from New York to Mexico, and they made it clear that even though this would become my home, we were guests, privileged guests, and as an outsider, I must learn to behave accordingly. If I hadn't lived a good part of my life in Spanish, I don't think I would have realized how much language can affect our behavior. On speaking Spanish, I have a Spanish-speaking personality and an English-speaking personality. I'm nicer in Spanish. This is from my black notebook from 1998. When I dress in Espanol, think crinolines and ruffles, I watch from the sidelines, still a guest at the party in this country where I've lived for 60 years. I cross my legs at the ankles, never splay my knees, and wave my hands a lot. In English, I flare my nostrils, fold my arms, shake a finger, raise a brow in disbelief. Pero en español, in este universo, haphazard, impersonal, one never assigns blame. Here we dance to the music of a world where las cosas así pasan. Things just happen. Money gets stolen, workmen tumble off ladders, bicycles spill riders onto sidewalks, people fall in love, no fault of ours. So we shoulder shrug a lot, judge nothing. We never point a finger and punctuate our phrases with words of doubt. See you at dinner maybe, quizá. We hope to leave tomorrow, ojalá. She'll marry in December. Dios quiera. Thank you. Thank you. And I would like to introduce Pilar Saavedra.
Thank you, Diana. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to Passenger for the honor of joining so many talented poets. My husband and I own a small hotel just outside of San Jose in Costa Rica. We closed in March because of the pandemic. When everything was shut down, I found new silences at night. No traffic, nothing but crickets and stars, and awkward distances between friends as we were unable to hug each other. I wrote a series of poems about those experiences, which sometimes triggered memories of my childhood in Colombia, I lived in Colombia until I was 12 and then in the US. So this is a memory like the one in the poem I will read, which is called On COVID Time 3. My friend Barbara, who just returned from Mexico, was turned to self-quarantine. She called to propose a trade, my Meyer lemons for her banana bread. I love everything she bakes. So I agreed. We'd exchange the goods from afar. I put a basket outside by the door, a paper bag too, so she could haul off the huge lemons. In turn, she placed a big Ziploc bag full of banana brownies in my basket and drove away. Then I remembered when Grandma would take us out on errands with her. At the convent down the block, she said, nuns mended stockings and embroidered beautiful cloths. Grandma would place her bag of stockings in a basket on a shelf, which would then disappear into the convent wall. Thank you. And now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our next reader, Rex Wilder.
Thank you, Pilar. Can everyone hear me? Good. Perfect introduction to me, because this poem, which is called Beach Love, was written in April, I think, when no one was allowed. You see in the background, I think I have my little phony background but that's actually where I live. And no one was allowed on the beach. And everywhere in Los Angeles, things were peeking out, new sounds, new animals. It really gave one hope. And it's similar to how I feel, I think, this morning with the hope again in America, and which is a good coincidence. This is called Beach Love. And it's also dedicated to my love, who I was falling in love with at the time, or a little earlier. Beach Love. A wave curls its palm as if around an invisible chin-up bar. And it's a sea lion, common enough on the wharves, but I've never seen one in these waters. It's happening around the world, a shift so pervasive, it's like backing out of nothing left. Animals are showing up in Yosemite that haven't seen the tourist parts since artists started painting them. Love is too, like a cautious beast that steps into the sun. Go, heart, go. Lights up, looks around, breaks into a run. And now I'd like to introduce a wonderful poem by Black and White by John Clowney.
Black and White is a somewhat self-explanatory riff on my teenage version of singing in the shower. This is back when I was a farm boy and had a much deeper relationship with Holstein milk cows than I've had for many years. My audience was small and seemingly captivated in their dull-witted but curious way. Anyway, Black and White. My daughter's former saxophone teacher has posted a short video of himself playing Jewish music on his saxophone by the side of the highway for a herd of cattle somewhere out west. He's young, the cows are black, beefy, ears pricked up. They come running, stop far short of the barbed wire, a long prairie stretched out behind them. Not quite desert, but a place you could get lost in for 40 years. Neither considers getting closer. The natural sound out here is wind, when the wind bothers to blow. Otherwise, there is a spare groove to the place, the swish of tails swatting the tiny burr, burr, burr of insect wings. I want to tell him that Holsteins, milk cows, used to listen to my singing, songs from the late 60s, when I was a boy doing barn chores. I was a lousy singer, not the wonderful sax player he is. But he should know that Holsteins are more expressive in their appreciation. Those beef cows are that audience in the New York basement club that barely clap when the sax man up on stage closes out his solo improv in a crazy run of scales. Holsteins crowd in close enough to touch you with long, thick tongues, big cow eyes bulging, focused on the off-key boy at the mic, singing with his eyes closed, snapping their cloven hooves. And now it's my distinct honor and privilege to introduce Antoinette Kennedy, our next reader.
Thank you very much, John, for that introduction. I'm Antoinette Kennedy, and I'm from Hillsboro, Oregon, which is just a little outside Portland. Over 40 years ago, I lived for 2 years in a low-income hotel with 3 other nuns and 39 men, many of whom suffered from addiction, mental health issues, and poverty. One of the residents was a man by the name of Bill, and then he lived with me again for 8 years, and I counted him as a friend. His life ended in 2005, and it never failed, looking back on this wonderful man, his life never failed to both sadden and surprise me. When I decided to write about him last year, my memories brought up 6 words every time I thought of him. And the words were dreams, boots, road, room, home, hands. And his life seemed suited for Sestina. So that is the name of the poem, Sestina for a Soldier. Bill sits in a cramped downtown room and dreams of too many years walking, wearing boots on old terrain that began on a road near a shack where a boy paced in a room and timed the cruel distance from home to freedom. Tonight, in the dark, huge hands trace the face of his wristwatch, a prize, hands that glow green. Sometimes he wakes from the dreams of winning a garden, hearth, and a home with a Lincoln shiny as black boots. The same hopes and pluck and good luck with room to spare, pushing him, that boy, down the road far out of Georgia, away from the road with signs marked colored only and dark hands shoveling dung. Army's segregated rooms for boy left him flickering dreams of Silver Star, khakis pressed, combat boots laced high, gun blazing, and back again home. In 42, he thought he'd found a home, but saw no combat, just shoveled shale roads. Enemy fire scarred him from waist to boots and forced him to settle for shrunken dreams of how to serve his country with dark hands. Wash, fold clothes in the Army's laundry room. Wartime desegregated other rooms or wards and bandaged wounds and sent them home to nowhere. Not once did he nurture dreams of heading back to Georgia's rutted roads. In Korea, the Army kept his hands warm, sorting overshoes for combat boots. Service done, he bought a pair of new boots, glossy ones, and walked upstairs to a room for one, too cold, too small. His huge hands shined someone else's shoes, clean docks, called home a corner cafe, Sisters of the Road. Every day he ate cornbread worth his dreams. Bill dreams in black and white of rutted roads smoothed by time's hand, a firelit, spacious room, and old boots standing, finally at home. And now it is my honor to introduce the winner of the 2020 Passenger Poetry Contest, Liz Abrams-Morley.
Thank you so much, Antoinette, and thank all of these wonderful poets. Since I don't get to introduce anybody, I wanted to start off by just saying that I'm completely awed and delighted with your with all the company that I'm in here. And I wanted to thank those of you out in Zoom land for being here as well. I am Liz Abrams-Morley. I hail from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where good things happen all the time and we are dancing in the streets. So I just wanted to say, I first found Passenger when I had recently passed 50, and I was excited to find a journal that spoke with such depth and elegance about the stage of life, that elder generation that I was just entering. Now it's 20 years later, and I'm honored to sit here as Passenger's 2020 poet. So before I share my work, I do want to say thank you to Kendra and to Mary and all the folks at Passenger who have graced me with this award and who have brought us all something worth reading for, that speaks to all of us. I have 4 poems I'm going to share today. And when I sat down to look over the poems in Passenger's poetry issue, I saw a thread. It was Lador Vador, the Jewish liturgy says. It means from generation to generation. My focus is always on what gets passed down, what gets passed on. History, as Mark Twain is supposed to have said, doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. There's been a lot made of the way social and political energy and upheaval in this country today somehow rhymes with the late 60s. And that was a period that heavily impacted my sensibilities and my definition of social justice and my recently reawakened activism. So I'm going to start with a poem from an earlier time. And it's wonderful, Antoinette, to read right after you, because in the journal, Antoinette's Sestina is right after my interview, which goes a lot to some of the same issues that she's writing about. This first poem is entitled On June 6, 1968. On June 6, 1968, my father reminisced about that Tuesday, 24 years before, when his buddies disgorged and Normandy's shores bloomed red, like a bucket of poppies, he'd said, flowering wherever teenage boys bled out, on sand or in water, salt bathing and burning wounds the way my father taught us to cure blisters and cuts all those summers by the sea. Just wade, he'd say, that'll clean it out. I was GI age that night in LA. Bobby Kay gave it the last speech he'd ever give. Some of my generation fighting in remote jungles, wading into leech-infested swamp water, a war so much less clean than my father's war. Bobby on the floor of the kitchen Ambassador Hotel as June 5th bled into the wee hours of June 6, 1968. That Thursday, he was dead. And for we who were coming of age watching assassinations pile one on the other, King before JFK, before RFK, JFK 5 years before, the world itself was writhing, its wounds too jagged to be healed by seawater. Still, I mostly remember how I sat, June 6, 1968, becoming June 7, then 8, swaddled in white bandages, feet elevated, heat, itches, stitches, pulling tight the sides of a wide surgical slice across me, hip bone to hip bone, my ovary, ready to explode and spew poison, having been ripped out just in time. Lost in the clot of much more critical losses. My own small wound bled until it stopped bleeding. My crimson scar, at first so angry, paling to shell pink and all but forgotten in those tumultuous decades after. I've been hearing my parents a lot in pandemic time. I think things get quiet and there's a lot coming back to us, but not all of my parents' wisdom was helpful. My parents were constantly counseling to look forward and turn the page on whatever was happening and just move on to the next accomplishment. So it's taken great yoga teachers, and before that, the wisdom of my children handed up to slow down and notice the now, which is another definite influence on my poetry. So this one is for Jessie and Erica, and for all the yogis and chosen sisters in my life. That day. Nightmares are what birthday parties are made of, or so you quipped, hustling through your children's childhood years, a distracted draftee, checking boxes on mental forms. You didn't know you wrote your own job description. Now cherry blossoms fill your window, a tree grown once again too tall despite careful trimming. The flowers a blessing of pink promise, while pandemic spring slogs through weeks long as months and months long as dog years, though lucky dogs still touch noses and wrestle in Washington Square, while we, mouths masked, can only smile with our eyes and wave from safe distances. Grandbabies are seen only on screens and seem sweet enough to be a taste on a dry tongue, a hunger of arms. Regret is stupid, your son, only 8 years old and so wise, once lisped. You remember that day, the slow hike through the woods, your gaze on his unmarked, gentle face, how completely you listened. Well, I think we've all been slowed down in thinking about this place where we are. I've been thinking a lot. My original background, professional background, was as a clinical social worker, and I've been thinking a lot about collective trauma and how that can literally shift the DNA of people who live through those events. I know my grandchildren, I have 4 of them, who range in age from almost 10 down to almost 6. And they're going to be marked by this time of confronting what I consider dual pandemics of COVID-19, but also the systemic racism that we're all facing in this country. This next poem began with that thought and the realization that my long gone father was actually the age of my youngest grandchild during the height of the Spanish flu pandemic. And unfortunately, I never got to ask him how that might have marked his thinking. My father, 13 years gone, speaks to me from the stoop I've not left in weeks. Magnolia blossoms raining down on my drive. Week 5 or 6, we've all lost track of days. And he's pulled by scent, and he says as he draws in a loud inhale, almost Mother's Day again, and all those magnolias, the sunlight. How I lined you up under magnolias, enough shade to grayscale the black and white prints I made for your mother every year. I only wanted to picture you in sunlight, and you were the one always squinting into the future, a little stood back, some shadow bisecting your cheek, forcing me to reposition the camera over and over, May after May. You sought out shadows like some soul crawled out from the clouds that hovered over my childhood. Pestilence, war, famine, every plague but the frogs. And I wanted my daughters bathed in sunshine, for them to grow sturdy as the trunks of old magnolias. Silence. Then as one by one the petals fall on me, another loud breath. I was 5 when the Spanish flu took a sibling or 2 from me, when the world hid behind masks and stayed out of sunlight. There is life after so much death, I tell you. But it ain't easy, kiddo. he's saying, in that way he's always said it, gruff, kind, then you can do it. I'm squinting hard and my arms reach for him, but I'm just swimming in air, just batting dust motes, lit and golden now, motes of nothing, bright and slanting, upward, upward. So I want to close on a sassy note because these times of unrest, I need to say, are also opportunities. And resilience and art and community and a raised voice on a corner, which I've been doing for the last 4 years every Tuesday, and dancing in the streets are also things I have to say I absorbed from my resilient peasant grandparents and ancestors. And I'm really taken with the importance of especially women, but people of my generation and especially the artists. So this last poem, and I thank you for your listening today, is Self-Portrait with Georgia on my mind. And no, not the state, though the state of the state is cause to fret. No, O'Keeffe, I say, and we are painting red poppies, and we are sliding crimson beyond the edges of our canvas, and we are learning to scribble outside the lines, and critics be damned. Deep into my 60s, I seek the wisdom of women who shed convention, became more than themselves, shining. I lift my brush, a pencil, dust vine charcoal across my paper, my shirt, sometimes even my cheek, crouch towards sidewalks to chalk messages, become a message I know others can't read, leave my marks everywhere. Thank you.
Liz, thank you that was absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much. It felt like you just brought all of us together into your poems. Everything. You just brought it all together. Thank you. Congratulations. A wonderful reading, and everybody just absolutely terrific. We're a very small literary press with a very big mission and a very big heart. And we've been together a long time. Mary and I have been together for 35 years now. Doing this work, and I don't think we ever imagined when we started it but it has just become increasingly more interesting and possible. Things are possible, so we can't stop doing it, and we have no intention of stopping. So it's really difficult now to raise money, and I hate to bring that up at a lovely reading, but I need to say that if you are at all inclined to make a donation, we would be very appreciative of it so that we could ensure Passager's future. We are lean, but we want to stay in print. We don't want to go digital. So that is still costing us money. And even a small donation or just a donation from your heart goes a long way in sustaining us. We have a podcast now every week, and that's called Burning Bright. And we have a host who reads Passager authors, and we have the Pandemic Diaries that we post on our website every week. So it's the shutdown has forced us and made things possible that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Actually, it's tricky with Zoom because we can't be in the room together. And I really want to be sure that all of you meet, if you haven't met, Mary AZRAEL, who is the co-editor. And Mary, do you want to just say hi so that you get in the middle of the room here?
Can I just say quickly, just to have your voices and your presence, your faces, your eyes, I've loved your poems just when they were words on pages, and every time I reread them now, they'll just be alive in a different way. So Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mary. Christine, are you there?
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Christine.
Passager's managing editor, Christine. It's wonderful to have you all and to have all of our participants here watching. I hope there are people all over the country and world joining in. So it's nice to have you.
And Roseanne, are you there?
I am, and I'm still feeling everybody's poems right now. I don't know that I expected to be as moved as I am, and thank you all.
Thank you.
I'm an editorial assistant at Passenger, by the way.
Yeah, she's just joined us this past year. Roseanne is an MFA fellow at the University of Baltimore. She's starting the creative writing and publishing program, which I used to direct. And now we don't think fellow is the right word though, but we are not too keen on gal either. So, but she's just been an absolutely wonderful addition to our little nest. So I just want to thank everybody for a marvelous afternoon, absolutely marvelous. And I hope that we can continue this. Pilar, maybe we can do something again, make it something a little more regular and a little bit less anxiety producing.
Yeah. We got over the jitters. Now we're better.
Now we're good. We're strong. All right. So I'll say goodbye. Thank you all so much. And